Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Tom Singer and Craig Brown.
This is the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for picking this show. We know that when you come to your podcast app, you have lots of choices, and yet here you are again at the show that was designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. Hey, my name is Tom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show every week with Craig Brown. Now, Craig is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. And about once a month, we also invite Mark Pendergast onto the show because Mark is the trustee for content for the Digital Enterprise Society, and he has decades of experience in PLM. Hey, Mark, Craig, welcome to the show. It's time for another digital battle.
Hey, Tom, glad to be back. Hey, Mark, good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you as well. It's been a while since we've done a battle, so it's probably good to do one. It's always fun to be here because I think this is one of those times when we can illuminate some of the dark corners of PLM and kind of look at it from different perspectives. And I think that's really the essence of the digital transformation journey, is to really understand what the trade-offs are, because there is no perfect world, right? It's always the lesser of two evils, and I think we help you understand which side you're on.
Well, today,
Tom,
yes.
Which topic are you going to confront us with this month?
Well, fasten your seatbelts because you guys are going to argue this one out. We're going to talk about the viscosity of data, why it doesn't flow like it should, because we all want data to flow really well, and we all know that it gets gummed up. Now, is it the people or is it the technology that slows us down? So, Craig, what do you think?
It's the people.
And Mark, what do you think?
Well, I think people have a role to play in impeding data flow, but I think the technology is just not there to facilitate them doing the right things.
All right, Craig, so what impedes the data flow the most about people?
If you would just use my tools, then it would be easy for me to support you. But because you use your tools and my data doesn't go in your tools, it's a problem. So it's the unwillingness of the people to really figure out that what matters to the company is the flowing of the data, right? So you can make better decisions. It's not about whether it's in your tool or the other guy's tool. And, you know, part of this is a technology thing, but in reality, people can get past this now. I think the technology is largely figured out how to transfer data, even if it has to convert it along the way. And so if it's still stuck, the data won't move. It's the people.
Well, I beg to differ with you there, Craig.
Okay.
I think
that's why we're here.
People are trying to get a job done, and in most cases in the modern world, one person can't get anything done. They've got to be able to share data with others, and I think the tools are just not very mature. I mean, you even mentioned it in your own argument. I got this tool, you got that tool. They don't talk to each other. What's the problem here? I mean, how long have we been doing this? These things ought to talk to each other, and they ought to.
But that's just like saying you speak English and I speak, some other language. Or maybe we speak Midwestern and Tom speaks Southern, and we just can't figure out how to communicate. I mean, I think part of that's why I picked on people. Well, how did the tools evolve the way they did? Well, it was input from people, but it was a specific discipline that said, hey, make my CAD tool this way or make my electronics tool that way. The fact that they were both talking about dimensions in space or how you package something, it's amazing to me we don't have standards on that. And actually, as you'll point out, there are a few standards, but it's amazing the tool vendors don't do it. I suppose it's because the people didn't demand it. If the people demanded it, we'd have data exchanges, right?
Yeah, well, that's the beauty of standards. We love them so much that we have hundreds of them, all of which are incompatible. So,
okay, gotcha. Created by people. It's the people's fault.
No, I think in general, most people want the digital thread to work. They want data to flow. Certainly, there are people that are worried about the risk and worry about protection of that data and whatever. But when they try to do it, ultimately, it is the technology that fails them. It's virtual private networks that are almost impossible to set up between companies, and security people that put all these different checks and balances in to make it impossible to send data around. And I want to send you this little subset of my data, and I can't. I have to manually hack it to pieces so that I can send it to you and not disclose all my 50 million years of man hours of engineering knowledge to you.
Okay. Well, I like where your thought is, but I still think it's people, because people, the trouble with computer, especially the laptop computers, the computers that are really cheap, right? You want me to share my design. Well, Mark, it's not quite ready yet. I got one more tweak. Let me one more day. Let me fix it, and then I'll send it to you. Well, if everybody's trying to perfect their design before they share it, then you slow things down. That's increased viscosity. It doesn't flow as well. It was interesting a few decades ago, back when computers were still really expensive, we developed a way to share data that was work in process, right? And everybody demanded it because they wanted to collaborate more. And so we developed it and made it robust so that it would share configurations that go together. And guess what? Nobody used it. And when we studied why they didn't use it, it was back to this, well, I got this one little thing I want to fix before I send it to you. It was amazing to me. That was the answer like 90% of the time. Why didn't they collaborate more? I'm not ready yet. Well, what was behind that? I don't know. People should be able to share work in process, and they didn't. And I don't really think it was tools, though. Tools, especially cheap computers, they didn't help because they forced you into files, right? To your point, you had to hack it apart in order to send a piece that was the official sharing version and not the proprietary version, right?
Well, but I think if you look at PLM, one of the things that we always struggled with was what we called phased release, right? Oh, yeah. And this maturity-based, okay, you can have this thing that I'm not sure is done yet, but here's how done it is, and here's the things I will allow you to do with that. And the technology, if you look at some of the big PLM platforms, they don't support that concept. Everything's either done or not done, frozen or not frozen. And they don't say, you can customize it in. Go tell one of those vendors that, I want to customize your tool to handle phased release. And they'll laugh at you and say, no, you shouldn't do that. And your executives will tell you, well, if they don't think you should do phased release, you shouldn't do it. So where are you back to? The technology doesn't support you as a human saying, hey, I've got this thing, but it's just in the embryo stage. Take a look at it, and you could probably go start looking for vendors for it, but don't build hard tooling.
Yeah, well, that's a really good point. I think I like your term phased release. In fact, back when I was still buying stuff and motivating tool suppliers, this was a big deal that was a criteria for me, at least, is the technology had to support it, right? Mm-hmm. And then those engineering leaders, I think I was pretty fortunate. I had leaders that understood phase gate releases. You have objectives at the first release, you have different objectives at the second release. And by the time you get to the last release, it's got to be a product Tom wants to buy. Okay. So the notion of objectives by phases makes sense to me. And of course you should share designs based on that, but I don't know. I think technology's come a long way, and I really do think it can be used to share effectively. And I think people have got to open their minds up to, it's okay for me to give you a partially working design, and I should tell you, of course, the limits of it. And if you break it beyond the limits, well, that's fine. You can do that if you want virtually. But we shouldn't hold back. We shouldn't wait till I make that last little change. I mean, that's just people not willing to share because maybe they don't want to be embarrassed, I guess, or maybe they don't want to admit where they're at or where they're not at, right?
Well, or they've been burned because somebody went out and bought hard tooling on their concept design, and then they got, well, I'm never doing that again because I got yelled at.
So that's a process problem, right?
Yeah. So I think that's kind of where we're ending up. Everything we've talked about here, you say people, I say technology, but it's kind of that process that marries the people to the technology that in many cases is where the failure is. So maybe we've even asked
Tom's got another question. I can see him waving at me.
So this is a perfect segue into my next question. Whether it's people or technology, or heck, if it's people and technology, what are the impacts of poor flow?
Well, I would say one of the big impacts that I see is data isn't able to be reused because it's never quite where it needs to be, or it's never quite in the form you need it to be. And so it's hard for people to take the simplest example that you mentioned is building tooling off a product model. How many times you see them remodeling the product because it's not quite the way they need it to build the tooling? And it's kind of that impact of redoing all through this digital thread that really, I think, is the biggest impact of really not having the good data flow, the nice lack of viscosity, if we want.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree with Mark on this point. It's inefficiency in your company, and change cycles is one of it. But if you get to one of these tooling points, especially if you're bending large pieces of metal, it's really expensive to change that after you've released the design. And so it can, if you're only a shareholder, you care because it hurts your stock price. If you're a competitive marketing guy and you're worried about time to market, it affects your time to market. So the impacts of poor flow are you can measure them. They come up really quickly. That's why this gets so much attention.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other one that we didn't really talk about that much is quality, because when that guy remodels
change cycles.
Yeah. When the guy remodels the product and he oopses and gets something wrong, and you build this huge die and it's wrong, and you start banging cars off the line and the doors don't fit or something. And you look back and you say, oops, missed that little feature on the product model when I remodeled it. In fact, I used to kid people that everybody in the chain from beginning to end takes what they get, puts it on layer 47, turns it green, and remodels it step by step by step all the way down. So you got all these extra models stuff off on other layers.
You know what that is? That's management that's incompetent, because the guy that's in charge, chief engineer or supervisor or whatever, all levels, they ought to go in and look and say, wait a minute, I don't want design derivatives. I want the master design. And they should really, and we had leaders like this. If it wasn't in the master design file, the progression to the next release, he wouldn't let you go through a design review, which is absolutely correct. That you should stop the flow if people are creating, variants that aren't really representative of the final design. So I don't know. What do you think, Tom? What else should we do?
Well, so that's my next question is, what can an organization do then to improve flow on the people side, Craig, and on the technology side, Mark? What can they do to improve flow?
So peer reviews and chief engineer reviews. So the people just need to really emphasize, did you get the latest material from that guy you're interfacing with? Or if not the latest, the best version that guy recommends, what Mark recommends. If you don't have the latest, then I don't want to conduct the design review, because there might be something you've missed. And so just the leadership, the people that are doing the quality checks are part of it. And it helps if the quality organization probably is independent, so it's an organizational design thing, of the actual design floor, because they're driven by different metrics, right? So the organizations can do that to say, get out of your seat and go talk to everybody you interface to. Really good companies would encourage you to go talk to everybody that they interface to, so go 2 layers, right? And understand how your design fits in that context, including all the dynamic properties, how it rattles and how it heats up and how it performs when it's really cold. And so you got an organization, this is part of what was behind Design for Six Sigma, is understanding noises, understanding how your widget works in the context of everything else. And that's a cultural thing. That's what an organization has to do, is encourage, a design thinking or Design for Six Sigma, encourage you to go way beyond your work assignment so that you understand how your thing is used by others.
Okay, well, I think that's kind of a reactive view of it. I think I would take a more proactive view of it. I think a while back we talked with the Department of Defense, and they actually had a strategy, a documented strategy for how they were going to share data. And I think you need to build it in from the beginning. Just like you're designing your product, you need to design the data flow to work. You need to know who those handoffs are from and to, what formats they're going to use, what the touch points are. Because a lot of times when that tooling guy isn't using the product model, because the origin's in the wrong place, or it's got in the wrong coordinate system, or it's in metric and he's designing the tool in English because the guy that's building it is in English. You know, there's a lot of these things that you almost need a plan to execute every data handoff from beginning to end.
So I like your point about a single data governance. I'll put a few words in your mouth, and I think people have got to decide and embrace one language, one data model, one way we're going to think about this, and when they don't, maybe because they have their own conventions or whatever, they have their own practices. I remember at our big car company, the different car divisions at one point had different approaches, right? Whether it was a Pontiac or a Chevy or what. And this may surprise everybody, but in fact, that's kind of the evolution of companies, right? As they see common things, they then say, well, we can use one V4 engine, right? So I think this data governance is a really important thing. You know, yes, we have a couple different dictionaries, but by and large, we all use the same dictionary, the same language. And I can't emphasize that enough. And that's a people choice, right? We should all be using the metric system, right? Or are you still using the English system, Mark? Which is it? That's got to be a people thing at the end of the day. Choose one.
Yeah, but I think, again, when you talk about data governance, every time I see it, they're looking at static governance, static fields, static tables, static objects. They're not looking at the flow, and that's why they miss it. You need to have data flow governance to make data flow. I think the other thing is, I'll give you the last one here. You need metrics. You need rewards. You need to measure flow. You need to say, hey, you tooling guy, what percent are you reusing of the product model? Oh, 40%? Okay, well, what would it take to get to 50? Okay, let's put that in place. What don't you like? Oh, the origin's in the wrong place? Oh, it's modeled this way, surfaces, and you need NURBS or you need whatever. Oh, okay, well, let's get a conference committee and let's work that out so that you can get your reuse percentage up. So how do you measure what you want and get it to happen?
That's a good idea. That's actually a good assignment for all the leaders of companies out there. Take your KPIs, your key product or process indicators, your measures, and ask yourself, does your data governance model support them? And if it doesn't, go fix that. It's still a people thing. Keep going.
Well, this actually goes to my next question. Are there some areas that have high potential value? Are there some areas where we should be focusing on the viscosity of data? What can we be doing?
Well, I really like Mark's idea about the metrics. And I don't think there's a consensus out there amongst us old guys of what the measure of viscosity would be. We were debating a little bit before we started today, viscosity or friction, or is it both? And of course, if you're a physicist, you begin to realize these are all interrelated. But I do think the measures, getting some clear measures like reuse is a pretty easy one once you describe it, but even the degree of change, right? I mean, maybe that's another metric is, you only want to change stuff that the consumer is willing to pay for, right? Everything else is wasteful if you think about it. And so, make it reliable, but only change stuff that drives the next product sale. So maybe those are two metrics, right? Reuse and focused change. I can say it. I actually don't know that I could measure it because markets change, right? People change. Yeah. So I don't know. Mark, what do you think? Are there other high areas of potential value?
Well, I think it's sad to say, but the mainstream flow has lots of inefficiency in it, and we could fix it. The ones we've been talking about, CAD to CAE, CAD to tooling, tooling to CMM, we still don't do those well. And how long have we been working on those? Since the 70s? So I think that's a place, everybody does it pretty much the same way, yet the technology doesn't really support it. The people, I think, would want to flow that data, yet it just doesn't happen as well as it should. And I think there's an area for standards for the vendors to step in and say, everybody does this. We're going to make it just fly. And they don't even make it fly within their own tool sets, let alone across tool sets.
So this is a really good point you're making. So who's at fault?
Technology vendors have crappy technology and they can't support it. Even within one vendor, they can't. I mean, if you go to a demo, you bet that baby just flies right through their tools, but you try and duplicate it yourself and you're struggling and nothing flows. It's all stuck. It's like glue. It's like maple syrup. It won't go.
Cold maple syrup. Really cold maple syrup. We're getting back into viscosities, temperature dependent, but never mind. Okay, so this, I mostly agree with you. This is what's the trouble, but I actually think it's people again. Let me explain. The people are the problem here because the sales guy at the software company, the tool company, they're looking for that next sale. How do they get the next sale? Oh, it's some person making the decision. The decisions are way too often based on, oh, show me how to draw that curve more efficiently, as opposed to make sure I can hand off my design to the numerically controlled machining equipment efficiently. So my point is that people aren't specifying the right criteria when they're making a choice in tool vendors or a choice in the next release. And so maybe the whole way we buy tools needs to be a bit more adjusted. There needs to be I guess that's a leadership thing. Maybe it is people. I mean, you just got to buy tools that communicate well and go downstream. Now, if you're a car company, that's been happening, right? Because at the end of the day, this all came out of manufacturing back upstream. Come on, guys, get computer-based, because it's ridiculous to have drawings and then manually build, dies. That doesn't make any sense.
So you're telling me the whole problem is CAD heads?
Yes, absolutely. And you know why? Because we put them at the center of the universe and said, hey, you guys are the key constraint for us going more efficient, which was, by the way, true at that point. And once they got that power, this is the way organizations evolve, by the way. Once they got that power, they didn't let go of it. Well, we should use our PDM system because it's clearly the best when I can show you on different measures where electronic and embedded software and other systems that manage product are actually much more attuned to customer interests than releasing a bunch of files to mass production factories. So, yeah, maybe it's the CAD heads. But to be fair to them, we put them under pressure, right? We say, oh, we want another fender. Get busy, do the next fender, right? And so we're always after them to be more efficient because they're the constraint. That's part of what happened. When you become the constraint, everybody focuses on you, right?
Yeah. Well, I think the other one that I'll give you that we ought to be able to do, that we've been doing since the 60s, is the CAD to PLM to ERP.
Well, you would think.
That's another one where I think we struggle because, again, the technology, and maybe you're right, maybe it's tuned by people at each step and not tuned by somebody who cares about the entire flow. But that is one that, again, we struggle with trying to understand, what does the plant need? The plant's trying to understand, what the heck are we shipping them? And you also get into those maturity, the phased release type issues. Well, I need the bomb right away because I got to order parts, but, but it's not done yet, And so I think that's another chain where if somebody would look at it end to end, and maybe you're right, Craig. Maybe we need somebody to write the end to end data standard, not the silo data standard.
And we're a small community, us old PLM leaders, and we got worn out, and we now do podcasts with Tom. But in reality, that's hard, right? I mean, even the big car companies we came out of, what drove them to computer-based design tools? It's really the capital investment. Well, once you got past bending sheet metal for a fender or casting a big block, or electronics is also important, but and it's become much more important. But they have key points where it's cost a lot of money. You got to go borrow money to build your plant. When you get past these exchanges you and I were talking about, oh yeah, that's Mark's problem. We'll just make him deal with CAD transfers into ERP. And yeah, it takes a week, but a week in the grand scheme of things isn't that big a deal. And so it wasn't expensive enough, if I can say it that way. It doesn't show up the same way, a tool and die work for bending sheet metal. It just doesn't show up. And so it doesn't get the attention it deserves. And as a PLM leader, I could argue all day long, but people didn't care because it didn't show up. It just didn't show up. So yes, it would be more efficient. Yes, it ought to be easy. Organizations form governance groups, and then they become powerful centers, and then they don't work with each other. Yeah. Senior leadership could take it apart. They need to take it apart, right?
Yeah, till you build 50,000 cars with the wrong fenders on them, or get the software in the engine control unit wrong in about 100,000 of them, and none of them will start off the end of the line. And then all of a sudden it's a crisis. And back to your point, then they blame the people rather than the technology, which was really probably at fault for not keeping a good set of configuration management parameters up to date. Because it was too hard
those are
to
really
use.
Good points.
It sounds to me like we have a draw in today's digital battle. It sounds like the viscosity of data, why doesn't it flow? Technology or people? Sounds like it's both. What do you think? Final words.
Well, I agree with Mark. It should flow, and it should flow better. The technology exists to help it go faster, right? And speed does matter. Innovation cycles want speed. But we got to do speedy things with quality in mind, right? With safety in mind. And so more standards, more checks and balances sounds like we're going to slow everything down. Computers can really help speed things up. The pattern matching technologies now, we just need to figure out how to use them. So the measure should be speeding up the flow and making the flow have no change cycles, meaning repair cycles. Right, we're going to have change due to changing consumer demand, but we shouldn't have change due to we mishandled the data. That we should measure it and we should make it go to zero. It really should be.
All right, Mark, final word.
I think I agree to some extent with Craig. It is the technology is siloed because the people are siloed. And the days when Craig and I hired in, where people got the grand tour and learned all the jobs and everything, just doesn't happen anymore. People get drop shipped into one job. They never leave it in their career. And they just really don't even know why the data flows or how it flows. And I think Craig and I lived in an age where, especially at GM, our parent, they really wanted you to know what happened upstream and downstream, and they put you on special assignments so you would learn that. And back then, the technology couldn't even possibly cause the data to flow like it needed to. And now that it can, we're retired and we can't make it work.
All right. Well, I love these digital battles, and I know the audience does too. So we'll be back in a few weeks with another digital battle with Mark and Craig. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for being part of our little family here with the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Make sure that you tune in every single week for more thoughts, ideas, and actionable information that will help your career in product lifecycle management. And remember, the Digital Enterprise Society is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Go check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.